thank Barry Foreman for his generous introduction to the message today in his communion thought. That was kind of nice. Today we're talking about being lovingly generous. And those two words, frankly, are awesome. You know, most people are not inclined to speak in public, quite terrified of it for the most part, or even give a sermon. But if you got to pick something to talk about, this is the subject that's, I would think, is guaranteed to make people happy, right? Everybody would love this. Lovingly generous. Who doesn't love generosity? In fact, I received a free trial at a gym. Free stuff, right? How generous is that? So I'm at the water fountain, and there are a group of guys lined up to get a drink when a cell phone rings. And the guy at the front picks up the phone from the bench beside him, and he answers. Now, the rest of us are trying to listen, but sometimes you can't help but hear. You know what I'm talking about? You're waiting in line, and what can we do? Hello, he says. And a woman's voice in the other end says, "Are you at the gym?" "Yes." She says, "I'm just at the jewelry store, and that diamond ring I was telling you about is still here. Can I buy it?" "How much is it?" "About $5,000. "Okay," he casually adds. And then he adds, "You should probably buy a necklace and a matching earrings to go with it." The woman on the other end is ecstatic. She says, "Thank you so much." And she says, but then she goes, I also stopped by the Land Rover dealership, and they have a sale on that new Land Rover Discovery. And they have a super sharp black one for only $75,000. It's like $10,000 off. He says, well, that seems like a steal. You should bring it home and make sure it has all the features. No sense skimping at this point. And we're all pretty wide-eyed. Like, it was like this woman is just asking for the moon. Like, how far can she push him? And she comes back with more. She says, "Honey, remember how I told you that my mother wants to come live with us? Is it okay if I invite her to come over for a month just to try it out, and after a month we can talk about it?" And he says, "Okay, fine, but don't ask for anything else today, okay?" He says, "Yes, honey, I love you." And he says, "Love you too, babe." And the guy hangs up. And we're just all staring at him. And he shrugs at us very casually, and he says, "Does anybody know whose phone this is?" So, obviously I made that up. But okay, so maybe being generous with other people's money is a little easier than being generous with our own money. But all through the Bible, we find the act of generosity produces vibrancy for our own lives. The act of generosity produces vibrancy in our own lives. It's like Jesus said in Luke chapter 6, verse 38. "Give and you will receive. Your gift will return to you in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back." So we're in our summer series called Summer Shorts, where we're looking at the big impact of some of the smallest books in the Bible. Today we're looking at one of the one-chapter books in the Bible, 3 John. John the Apostle writes this near the end of his life. He's likely the last living apostle. And so after 30, 40, or 50 years of following Jesus, he is profoundly moved by the generosity of God's love. It just so overwhelms him. In fact, all three of his letters, 1 John, 2 John, and 3 John, literally bubble over with love. And in the third letter, he draws a connection between love and generosity. And this letter is a personal letter. It's to a man named Gaius. And this is how it goes. 3 John says, "John the elder, to my dear friend Gaius, whom I love in the truth. My dear friend, I hope all is well with you and that you are as healthy in body as you are strong in spirit." It literally says, I pray God would prosper you in body and soul. Now, some of the traveling preachers, John continues, recently returned and made me very happy by telling me about your faithfulness, that you are living according to the truth. And I could have no greater joy than to hear that my children are following the truth. Dear friend, I want you to know and be encouraged that you are being faithful to God when you take care of traveling teachers who pass through, even though they are strangers to you. You don't even know them, yet you open your door to them. They have come back and told the church here about your loving friendship. He said, "Please continue providing for such teachers in a manner that pleases God, for they are traveling for the Lord, and they accept nothing from people who are not believers. So we ourselves should support them so that we can be their partners as they teach the truth." Then as we look at verse 9, we realize that this is actually a common theme of John's. He's previously written to the church that Gaius is part of about this generous hospitality, though, as we'll see, it hasn't always been well received. And so he continues, I wrote to the church about this, verse 9, but Diotrephes, who loves to be the leader, refuses to have anything to do with us. When I come, I will report some of the things he is doing and the evil accusations he is making against us. Not only does he refuse to welcome the traveling teachers, he also tells others not to help them. And when they do help, he puts them out of the church. Dear friends, don't let this bad example influence you. Follow only what is good. Remember that those who do good prove that they are God's children, and those who do evil prove that they don't know God. On the other hand, everyone speaks highly of Demetrius, as does the truth itself. We ourselves can say the same for him, and you know we speak the truth. I have much more to say to you, but I don't want to write it with pen and ink, for I hope to see you soon, and then we will talk face to face. Peace be with you. Your friends here send their greetings. Please give my personal greetings to each of our friends there. Summary. John feels a deep sense of gratitude for Gaius for his maturity and faith that shows up in his loving generosity and his hospitality. John encourages him to choose his mentor wisely. In his case, he has these two men, Diotrephes on one side, who missed the point of Jesus, and Demetrius, who actually encapsulates by his life the love of Jesus. Now, the crazy part is, we're talking about Gaius and Demetrius, or Diotrephes. The crazy part is, both these two men claim to be followers of Jesus. They were Christians, leaders in the church. So what's the difference? What drew John's attention and admiration for Gaius and brought sorrow and disappointment for Diotrephes? Now, I'm guessing both of these men actually did know how to give, but only one of them knew how to be generous. See, to give is a simple transaction. To give, you don't have to be generous. Giving can come out of duty, it can come out of pride, it can come out of self-righteousness, it can come out of ambition, it can come out of control. To be generous requires that we have genuinely transformed hearts and minds. See, here's the bottom line. The light of God shines through people like Gaius and Demetrius, and the ego and control of people like Diotrephes cast a shadow on the love of God. And the difference is transformation, changed hearts. See, Paul understood the urgency of this when he wrote Romans 12, verse 1. He said, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." He said, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will." I think this is the perfect verse to help us understand what's going on here. As I said, because all the people mentioned in this passage would call themselves Christians. And yet, it's pretty clear from John's comments that one of them believes he has everything right, but is actually getting everything wrong. He's got the right answers. He probably thinks he has the right reasoning. And we can all get ourselves in this place. It's easy for us to judge, but we can easily find ourselves here because the problem with thinking you're right often keeps us from seeing the reality of our life from God's perspective. Now, I've got to be honest here. This past year for me, I've been trying to learn to listen to God. And sometimes through the voice of others, sometimes through my Bible reading and prayer. And there are some places that I'm just not happy with what I'm seeing in my life. I've been going back and I'm revisiting, how open am I to being transformed? How passionate am I to follow God absolutely anywhere? And it's been one of my big questions during this whole pandemic. Will people substitute watching, the convenience of watching video rather than being transformed? How much do we really long to be transformed into the image of God? USA Today in 2008 reported on a poll where 1,000 women were asked what steps they would be willing to take to reach their ideal weight. What steps would they be willing to take to reach their ideal weight? In essence, how badly do you want to transform your physical image? How far would you go? And this is what they found out, that 23% would shave their head if that would help. 22% said that they would wear a bikini on TV if that would help them find the perfect body. 23% said that they would spend a week in jail. They would spend a week in jail if that would help them have reach their ideal of their transformed body. And 21% would trade 10 years of their life. And I'm thinking like, wow, a quarter of women would voluntarily spend a week in jail to transform their physical looks. And more than 1/5 would trade 10 years of their life. 10 years of their life. And I ask the question, what would you be willing to do to be transformed into the kind of person that is truly generous? To be transformed into the image of God, because God is the epitome of generosity. Now, you might be thinking, well, could you explain this generosity thing again? Because I really want to get this, but I want to know what I'm getting into. Well, so let me explain by comparison. When it comes to giving and generosity, there are basically three types of people. There are people who aren't generous, and they don't give anything to speak of. No one, including themselves, would call them generous. They live for themselves, and they know it. Second, people who give, who make donations and contributions, sometimes even big and regular contributions, but nevertheless are not generous. And three, people who are truly generous, lavishly, unselfishly, altruistically generous. We don't need to explain the first one because everybody knows what that is, and if you're that, you know it. If you know people like that, you know it. There's no surprise, there's nothing, it's all pretty clear. The second one is confusing, and you can't always tell because motives are not always obvious. See, some people tithe regularly to their church. A tithe is 10% of your income. It was the law in the Old Testament scriptures, and a principle that many people use to determine what level of giving they should do. Now, technically speaking, in the New Testament, the half of the Bible that comes after Jesus, tithing is never commanded, just generosity. But back to the tithe. Some people tithe not because they're generous, but because it's like paying the rent or paying your mortgage. It isn't something I'm keen on, but it's the payment the banker demands if I want to keep the house. So it's giving as a paying my due. Now, some people, giving is about control. I want what I want, and so I will give to the things that I want and hold back from the rest. It's a way of holding power over others. Sometimes we don't even do it intentionally. We just kind of slide into it. And in some ways, the more money you have, the more tempting this is. So giving sometimes is a way about maintaining control. The church supports the things that I'd like to support, because if they don't, I don't give them the money, and they can't do it. As simple as that. Now, some people give for the image or the accolades that they get in return. And this is it's really the socially acceptable way of throwing a parade for yourself. I do it for the plaque on the wall. I do it for my name and lights. I do it for whatever gets my name put somewhere. Now, the other character of giving that fails short of generosity is that is when it generally doesn't cause the giver much pain. It is giving that easily fits within my lifestyle. So I recall a conversation with a fellow who had a spectacular year in real estate. He was a Christian, and he practiced, tithing was a practice of his. And he asked me, so with this tithing thing, is it 10% no matter what? And I said, so why do you ask? And he said, well, I had a remarkable year last year. I made $500,000, $500,000. But that would mean tithing $50,000. So I responded, so do you think you could squeak by in the remaining 450? And I didn't say that to be judgmental. His was a good question, and my answer was intended to prompt him to look at something different than the amount he was giving. So the truth is, if he had cut a check for $30,000, he would have received all kinds of accolades. He could have used that to gain influence on the shaping the future of the organization that he gave to. But as big as a gift as it was, it may not have come close to generosity, and it wouldn't have made his life difficult in any sense. See, generosity flows from love. It looks at the need, and it looks at the resources God has provided, and it shares without fear or without holding on. When John commends Gaius, he commends Gaius is for that he looked at the need. He looked at what he had, and he shared. The people needed a place to stay, they needed food, they needed financial support to carry on their journey. And Gaius showed a level of discernment, even though he didn't know them personally. So you might have thought he was undiscerning, but he actually knew the mission they were engaged in, and he knew that that was worth supporting, and so he was able to do that. Now, one of the problems that we have with generosity, and I believe it's becoming a lost art, is that there's a great amount of generosity that involves hospitality. Now, when I use the word hospitality, some of you are having a little panic attack. You're feeling shortness of breath, your pulse is starting to raise, you're thinking like, I don't cook, I don't clean, my house is too small, I still have shag carpet and wood paneling from the 70s. Hospitality is not, I repeat, is not my gift. So let me just kind of talk you down from the ledge for a bit here. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. Meals are great avenues of hospitality, but they are not the only way. See, the essence of hospitality and generosity is sharing your life with another. My son's brother-in-law says he keeps buying boats, kayaks, canoes, fishing boats. Now, I'm not talking a yacht here. They're talking about little fishing boats. And his wife says, we have 5 boats. Why do you need another boat? He says, I just want to be able to take people with me. He says, I can't cook mac and cheese, but I have spent a big chunk of my life in boats of some form, and it's one thing I could do. If I can take people with me, I can share my life with that person. And we can have fellowship and encouragement and love. See, here's the thing. Comparison with others, comparison with other people's lives, comparison with other people's money, comparisons with other people's cooking ability, cleaning ability, possessions, keeps us from living the generous lives that we deeply long to live. And it keeps us from experiencing the vibrancy of faith that is genuine and close to the heart of God. See, what you have is worth sharing. And I want you to say that with me. Write it down. What I have is worth sharing. What I have is worth sharing. You have something that God has given you that can encourage, that can lift up, that can prompt others to good things. It could be a hobby, it could be food, it could be time, it could be the ability to write and share encouraging cards. In churches when we gather together, and maybe you're kind of forgetting what that looks like, but hospitality is making the effort to talk to somebody you don't know. If you see somebody standing on the road, it's okay to excuse yourself from the people you do know and say, hey, I just want to connect with this new person. Or maybe connect with that person who's not new, who's been around a long time, but always seems to be standing on their own. I'll call you this week. And now we can say in churches when we don't gather together, there are still avenues of generosity. Hospitality can be a phone call, a note. It can be, I'm thinking and praying for you. How are you doing? It could be praying through the church directory and asking God to put on your heart those who need someone to reach out to and maybe drop a meal off or have a socially distant wiener roast in the backyard. There are just lots of possibilities. Just ask of God, what have you given me? Help me to see how I can use that. So let's wrap this up. Here's some questions to ask. 1, are you growing in your love for others because you are growing in your understanding of God's love for you? Are you growing in your love for others because you are growing in your understanding of God's love for you? Number 1. Number 2, which person on the generosity scale best describes you? 1, I don't give much at all. 2, I do give, but because of my attitudes or motives, it probably falls short of generosity. 3, I love to share what God has given me, and I can't wait to see the faces of people when God allows me the privilege of blessing their lives. And I don't even care if I have to do without. I'm okay with that. Okay, so that's the 3 categories. Which one best describes you? Okay, number 3, how can you do hospitality your way? What do you do naturally? Now, if you can't figure that out, find some people who know you and ask them. They'll be able to tell you some of the things that are amazing about you and the things that God has put in your life. Fourth question. What act of generosity can you share this week? What act of generosity can you do this week? I'm going to throw a 4th one in. And if you've recently been touched by an act of generosity, ask yourself, who can you share that with that would be encouraged? Remember, even John told Gaius to connect with Demetrius as an example and as a mentor. And you can be that for somebody. And your example, your story can help somebody else discover the kind of this vitality that comes from living the generous life. So having said that, I just want to take some time to pray for you and pray for all of us. So would you bow with me? Heavenly Father, I just want to thank you for this letter that's vibrant, that just filled with the reminders of how deep God's love is for us. And I pray, Father, for each person who's listening to this, that they would hear with clarity how much you love them, that you would help them see, even in challenges they're facing, that you have not abandoned them, that you are walking with them. That as they look around, maybe their lives don't match up to other people's lives, but that doesn't matter. God has given them so much that they can use to bless and give to others. I pray for just a spirit of generosity in each person who's listened to this, that you would free us up to be transformed, to pursue living in your image of love and generosity. So I pray that for each family, that they would have a great week. I know in this time of this COVID virus that there's a lot of isolation. There are a lot of people who are kind of on their own, and some people are loving just the peace and quiet, and some people are desperately lonely. So I pray, Father, that you would move us to connect in ways that are healthy and safe and using wisdom. But Father, may we invite others into our lives and share with great generosity, and that we might experience the vitality of living in the image of your Son, Jesus. It's in his name we pray. Amen. So we close. I just want to encourage you to be lovingly generous this week. Now, if you have a story of generosity that you'd like to share on our Facebook page, that would be awesome too. As usual, there are a few announcements that we've included in the email or in the Facebook page where you receive this link for this YouTube playlist. And it includes some things that are going on. It includes a link if you wish to donate to the church. Of course, there's no expectation or obligations. But I just want to thank you again. And I trust this last song, which is called I Will Build My House, will be a great encouragement to you in your transformation into the heart of God.